well, and I'm a kind of a smart guy, wise guy. I say, for the love of God, Jim, I could start a school in Cleveland by the time we finish this report. And Larry Reuter looks me, my high school English teacher, looks me right in the eye and says, why don't you? And at that moment, it was, why don't I? That is exactly right. Why don't I? And, then that experience in the chapel began to make sense. And here come the tears.
Right.
18 years later.
Right.
Whatever that was, I don't know. John Foley says, I have the gift of tears. I don't want the gift of tears. I want to return the gift of tears. But I can't stop crying when I think about it. I don't know what that is. I take it to be God, okay? But it could be anything. I don't know what it is. I told you earlier.
Right.
I got hypoglycemia. I don't know what it is.
Wow.
But I just can't, when I talk about it, as long as it's been, I can't stop doing this.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 2 of the Richard Clark series on Circulate. I'm your host, Gary Martin. If you haven't already, please go back and listen to episode 1 of the Richard Clark series, where it's the beginning of his story of his transformation in Peru, which led to the start of the Cristo Rey Network, and him ultimately wanting to be the founding president of St. Martin de Porres High School. In episode 2, Rich continues to tell that story of his transformation in Peru, along with why parents chose to send their students to St. Martin de Porres, how the book Good to Great had an effect on him, his philosophy on how to tell stories, and a really great quote on how we are called to do things. Rich says, the call is always there. It's just when will you decide to listen, which is ultimately the name of this podcast. So welcome to episode 2. Thanks for listening. Without further ado, Rich Clark. Episode 2. We start where you're in the school and you're kind of going back over everything you learned. So I guess I'll let you pick it off. Take it off from there.
Okay. So we went back to La Immaculata, the big Jesuit school in Lima, and they had a nice little room, and they had a whiteboard. So it was Jim and Larry Reuter, the high school English teacher that I had, and John Foley. And so we're going to write a report of what we think this network, and we're the head of the Fe Alegría in Peru, the office. He's talking about the way it happened was it's the mission, and he called it the Mystica. So it's just kind of the essence of something. And then the network, if you will, the word he used, they just like saying this, it's a fun word, impulsar. The impulse. That's what the network does. It just sends out that impulse, and then people respond to it and do something. So that was kind of the general idea. So what is the school going to be? Well, we're going to model it after the Chicago school. So, it'll be Catholic. Should it be Jesuit? That was a question. And the guy in Fe Alegría said, don't limit it. Everybody wants to do this. Anybody who has read the gospel is going to want to do this.
Right.
Okay, so don't just make it one kind, which we said, okay, it's Catholic, whatever that means. And then, it would be family oriented. We saw that with in this school, Fe Alegría number 37. The mothers cooked the lunch, it was a very family oriented. The nuns would hug the little kids. It was a nice place to be.
Right.
So it was very hospitable, very nice. So it would be family. It was neighborhood. In other words, people were coming in from the neighborhood to be at this school. So we started listing things like that on the whiteboard. And I honestly had enough sense about me to say, this is important. What we're doing here is important. This is like the Declaration of Independence. I'm going to take a picture. Now, this is pre-cell phone. I actually had a camera. And I took a picture. And it's a pretty good picture. I wish I had better equipment or took more time. But I still have the picture. It's on my desk. And there's 10 network standards now, Cristo Rey Network. I think 4 or 5 of them are on that board. So we'd already kind of got the guts of it right there. Work study was very important. That was in there, too. So that's going along. Now we're going to get to the writing of the report. So Father Steger is the leader, and he is a very methodical guy. Should it be Ignatian? Should it be Jesuit? Should we say this? Should we say that? And I'm not that kind of guy.
Mm-hmm.
I just go, let's write the damn report. Okay?
Right.
So I say, well, and I'm a kind of a smart guy, wise guy. I say, for the love of God, Jim, I could start a school in Cleveland by the time we finish this report. And Larry Reuter looks me, my high school English teacher, looks me right in the eye and says, why don't you? And at that moment, it was, why don't I? That is exactly right. Why don't I? And, then that experience in the chapel began to make sense. And here come the tears.
Right.
18 years later.
Right.
Whatever that was, I don't know. John Foley says, I have the gift of tears. I don't want the gift of tears. I want to return the gift of tears. But I can't stop crying when I think about it. I don't know what that is. I take it to be God, okay? But it could be anything. I don't know what it is. I told you earlier.
Right.
I got hypoglycemia. I don't know what it is.
Wow.
But I just can't, when I talk about it, as long as it's been, I can't stop doing this. So anyway, I kind of get on fire. I say, well, I'm going to start school. So I come back, and I remember we landed on a Saturday night, and on Sunday morning I called up a friend of mine, Mike Knock. And Mike Knock was involved early on with Urban Community School. So he'd kind of been when a school was starting. So I called him up, and I said, it was 9 o'clock in the morning, and I said, like, Mike, I just got back from Peru. We got to start a high school here. We got to do. And I just started rambling. And he said, Rich, have you been drinking? And I'm like, no, it's 9 o'clock in the morning. I haven't been drinking. I'm serious. And then he said, well, you got to talk to the bishop. And I'm like, why? He said, well, because it's a Catholic school. You just can't start a Catholic school. Oh, okay. And it was kind of at that point, reality started to kind of creep into this, that, oh, yeah, this is going to be a process. So I come back on Monday to school. And every Monday morning I had a meeting with Father Welsh. And he wanted to know what's going on in school, what's the pulse. And also, he would have, I don't know how he had found out all this stuff, but he would know if something over the weekend happened, like somebody had a party in Rocky River, or the police caught some kid or whatever, so he'd always want to grill me on these things. So it was kind of a meeting where I'm like,
what happened this weekend?
Yeah, exactly. So he says, so tell me about Peru. So I tell him the story. And I tell him the story about the chapel. I tell him the story that I just finished telling you. And I was weeping at that point. Right? So I said, Father, I got to be involved in starting the school. Now, I don't want to leave Ignatius. I love Ignatius. My oldest son was just starting there. My second son was going to go there. And I did love the school. I do love the school, but I did really love it then. But I got to be involved somehow in starting this. I want to end up on the board or something like that. But I need your permission because you're the president of the school, and I don't want you to find out your principal's going around starting a new school.
Right.
So you got to kind of say it's okay. And he turned to me and said, Rich, maybe that's what we ought to be doing.
Wow.
I was like, wow. So that totally unleashed me, okay? Now, fast forward a little bit. That would be 4 years later from that moment. If you had bet in 2000, in October of 2000, that the principal and president of St. Ignatius High School would be working at East 62nd in St. Clair at a new school, you would have won a lot of money.
Right.
So the point being is, I point to that as evidence of God. I mean, how else does that happen?
Especially with everyone associated with the story, even at this point.
Yes, it's so strange. It's strange. He gives me the yes, and then from then on. Now remember, this is 2000. We didn't you didn't come here until 2004. All right, so that's a long period of time, and that was a very difficult thing to happen. First of all, I had a full-time job. Right. And I did my job. This wasn't like I took a sabbatical. I still did my job. A lot of nighttime work. Jeff Thielman, who was in charge now of starting new schools, would come out and help. We finally had to hire somebody to kind of do the grunt work and other work, and we did. And then gradually it became apparent that this school was going to happen.
Okay.
And at that point, I thought we were going to have a sponsorship or ownership by the Jesuits and the Sisters of Humility Mary.
Mm-hmm.
And by having those two groups own us, we'd be Catholic, and that's how you become a Catholic school. That's one way. Shortly before we opened, the Jesuits and the Humility Mary were on a conference call with me, and they said they were not going to sponsor the school. They were merely going to endorse it, which they didn't know what it meant. They want to be involved, but they think it was a lay, started thing. We should own it. You should own it. Like, okay, but how am I Catholic school then if you don't own it?
Whoa. So
Yeah.
they were helping you because you came back with the energy
the idea.
and pushing the idea.
And they liked the idea.
And they knew that, and they believed that it should be faith-based. But
Yes.
They just couldn't.
They felt they didn't. Now, in their defense, the Jesuits already had 47 high schools.
So it's just like, we don't want to.
I mean, my God, we're going to have 50 more.
Right.
I mean, that's not going to happen. So, and also, I think it was in good theology, really, that it was a lay initiative. It wasn't coming from the Jesuits. They
Right.
were partnering with us, not the other way around.
So they felt like it was the right thing to do, even though they wanted to be a part of it. That makes sense.
It turns out to be a great decision.
Right.
I mean, because the Jesuits have been very good to us. The Sisters of Humility Mary have been very good to us. They serve on our board. We had a Sister of Humility Mary working here, Sister Madeline.
Yep.
And they paid for her. Mm-hmm. So there's great support. But we could run it like we see fit.
That's the awesome part.
So we didn't have to, we weren't going to become a traditional Jesuit school. This is not a traditional school in any way, shape, or form.
Right.
But it's certainly not a traditional Catholic high school. But it is a Catholic high school. Mm-hmm. So that was a wise decision that I didn't think was so wise at the time. I was a little mad. So we opened the doors first. So it's going to be a school. Now I'm still the principal of St. Ignatius. I love it. I don't want to. So I began to ask myself some questions like, well, should I be the leader of that school?
Now, what year is this?
This is probably 2002, 2003.
So you're getting there.
So it's starting to hit me.
Yeah.
And so I asked Ron Trzynski, who the mattress guy. I knew him. He was on the board of Ignatius for a while. He's a Benedictine man, proud of it. Mm-hmm. So I was wondering, should I be a president of a Jesuit high school or a new foundling Cristo Rey high school, whatever that meant? Remember, at that time there were only 3 in the world at that time.
Right.
So it wasn't a foregone conclusion that it was going to work. Mm-hmm. Okay, it wasn't a proven model yet. So I called him up to ask for advice because he's got a good sense about him. He's got a good laser sense on how to make decisions. So I mentioned a few Jesuit high schools.
Right.
Okay, and that I was interested in. I thought might be interested in me to be a president because I wanted to eventually be a president. So I said, well, should I do that or should I do this? Mm-hmm. And he says, well, Rich, sometimes it's helpful to ask yourself, what do you want on your tombstone? Mm-hmm. Rich Clark, president of a mediocre Jesuit high school, or Rich Clark, founder of a high school that's changing lives?
Wow.
I'm like, okay, I get it.
I get it.
Thank you for the advice, Ron. And I
wasn't really leaving it up to you by saying it that way, right?
So, but sometimes that's good. You have somebody outside of you say, what are you, nuts?
Right.
This is what you have to do. So I talked to people on the feasibility study, which was kind of like our board at the time, mm-hmm. that I would be interested if they would want me. And they actually had interviewed. They interviewed other people for this, which I kind of felt hurt by.
Right.
For God's sakes, I've been doing this for 4 years. You don't know who I am? But they had to.
Yeah, it's the right thing to do.
It's the right thing because then Rich just got that job. No, it was an interview process. I fortunately was chosen, and then hit the road running.
One question. So in that interview process, were they asking people, well, why do you want to run this school?
Yes.
And I'm assuming you told the story of the...
Yes.
So, of course.
Well, I'll tell you, they asked that. It's funny. That story, I used to tell that story all the time, okay? And it's hard to tell because I cry.
Right.
So and it seems like, oh, God, he was called by God. I mean, I don't mean it that way. It's a real story. I can't help it. So I don't tell it as much anymore. I was just in Florida visiting a donor, and he took me out to dinner with his wife and another woman. They wanted to get interested. And he'd never heard that story. And he says, I've always been curious, Rich, how did you get involved?
Oh, gosh.
Oh, no, help me.
It comes to you.
But it's a great story. So I tell the story in the interview, okay? And
how can you not? It was like, I'll almost be uncomfortable. It was like, oh, okay.
Right. Well, I mean, they asked. So I tell them, I'm crying. And a woman in the interview process, who remained nameless, says, well, wow, that's really... for a man that you're crying, that's really impressive. I cry all the time. Don't think it's so impressive. But for whatever reason, I mean, clearly I was on fire about this. If they wanted somebody who was on fire, I'm your guy.
Right.
And I had the experience of running schools. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, at first, of course, I thought starting a school would be, well, let's order the pencil sharpeners and let's go.
Right.
And that isn't how this school works, as you know. But anyway, so I got hired. And then they sent me. They were worried about my experience in terms of raising money and being a president. So they sent me to University of San Francisco to a summer program, Institute of Catholic Educational Leadership, ISIL. And I went there for 2 weeks, which is nice. Again, 2 weeks in San Francisco. That's not
right.
bad. But it was a good class. I mean, it kind of gave you the little, what's the spectrum of what might happen when you're a president? What are your jobs? What's your role? How you do this? So it was a good overview of the job. And of course, I had Father Welsh working with me, mm-hmm. and he was great. Any issue, I could just say, "What do you think, Bob? What should we do here?"
Can you talk about some of the things that, like, whether it be with that class and with that right leading up into where we're about to start the school, some of the issues and hurdles and things you kind of learned?
Yeah. Well, the hardest thing was, and I say this, it sounds, again, like a joke, but it's absolutely true, and there's no kidding about it. I did not understand what I was doing.
Right.
I had no idea about black culture. I had no idea about poverty. I mean, when I was in high school, we used to tutor kids on the west side of Chicago. I mean, so mm-hmm. I'm not totally ignorant, but I had no idea. Right. None. Okay. And I'm a white guy, mm-hmm. and I'm full of all those stereotypes that I have of being white and of blacks being black, and mm-hmm. That's who I am, and it's hard not to, in a society for a white person, well, it's impossible not to, certainly we benefit from white privilege all the time.
Right.
But to know that you're benefiting it is not all that clear.
Yeah.
It's my hard work that got me here. Or right. The myth of, the pioneer or whatever. I mean, it's all baloney. Mm-hmm. I now see that. But at the beginning, I had no idea. I mean, I'll tell you the funniest thing. I mean, you might have been there. I don't know, when did you go to those Saturday morning training things we did? In like springtime, you came late.
Maybe,
didn't you?
Yeah, I came late.
Yeah, so we had the kids that were assigned, or there were like 50 of them. Mm-hmm. We had 100 eventually, but there were 50. And they came every Saturday. And Tom Bennett, the corporate study, and I, they'd have like a little math tutoring or something. Then they'd play games and get to know each other and do social stuff. And then we cook lunch. So they wanted hamburgers. So I'm thinking grilling, 50 hamburgers. Tom, no, we can do it in the oven. That's how they do it in restaurants. So we lay out the patties on the full sheet pans and put them in the oven. Now, I like my hamburger medium rare, okay?
Oh, yeah.
Well, okay, so, all right, that's how stupid I was. So we'll make it medium rare. So I was like, ew, ah! And I This is the only time I tried to convince somebody, no, it's good that way. Now just shut up, put them back in the oven.
Yeah, where we're raised in our culture, more often than not, we want our hamburgers well done or cooked through.
Whatever. So I get that. So there were all sorts of things. And then, early on, we had Byron Thompson came, a black guy, and worked in corporate study, great guy. And young, right out of college. I mean, it was great. It was a great person to have. Totally related to the kids and so forth. So early on in the first semester, maybe even the first couple of months, a kid walking down Norwood to the bus stop right after school, a white kid, gets jumped by like 6 middle schoolers, and they hit him in the face and take his book back. So he comes back to the school. I think he's more embarrassed that the middle schoolers took his bag than anything else. And he had a mark on him, and it was a pretty good punch. So he went into Mary Ann Vogel's office. He's kind of crying. So we call the police. So Mary Ann tells me the story, and I say, well, Byron, why don't you and I go out and not capture these kids, but maybe we can see where they are, where they're going. So we go out to the school building. We're going to walk around the block. So we get to St. Clair in Norwood, and there's a kid waiting for the bus, a freshman. I don't know who he was. He had the tie on. He looked great. White privilege. So anyway, he comes. He says, "What are you doing?" We tell him, "Can I come with you?" Sure, you can come with us. So we come around to Lauschie, which is the street that's in front of the building, and 61st Street. So we're about a half a block from the main entrance of the school. It's now been 45 minutes since we called the police about an assault at a school.
Right.
Okay? No sign of them. All right, so I'm a little irked. So we turned the corner, and there was a young woman named Tikel. Do you remember Tikel?
Yeah.
She was pretty good looking, and she was on her way walking to Superior to catch a bus. Well, our young man saw Tikel, and he wanted to go talk with Tikel. All right, so he crosses the street, still with, one corner to the next. Talking to Tikel's, we're all dressed business professional. Everybody looks, like they're business professional. And up comes the cop car to the front of the school building, and out walk cartoonishly white policemen. A little overweight. I'm sorry. I'm not saying all police are like that, but it was like out of Homer Simpson. It was ridiculous. And I'm mad. Well, then they pop right back in their car and, screech to the corner, get out, and start rousting the young man. What are you doing here? You don't belong here. Well, we were across the street, remember? Byron and I were there. He had walked across the street to talk to Cal.
And y'all watching this happen.
Yeah, I'm watching this happen. What are you? So I run over. Byron's behind me. And I say, hey, he's a student here. What are you doing? We called you 45. And I'm starting to get really mad at the cops. I feel a tug at my shirt. In other words, Byron's tugging me back. And I'm not backing down. I'm like, no, there's a kid in this office. He's been waiting 45 minutes. These kids are probably long gone, but at least, interview him and talk with him and leave this kid alone. Well, we didn't get the call until, I said, just go back. So he goes back. And I'm livid.
Right.
All right. So we walk back. Cal continues to the bus. The other kid comes back with us, and he's going to go back to the bus stop. And Byron points with a finger to his hand and says, "Welcome to my world." And that was a true epiphany for Rich Clark.
Right.
Because up until that point, I would have been the guy, "Oh, it's not that bad. They don't really do that." No, it's true.
Right.
Really true. And now, some 14 years later, we've had off-duty policemen here, and they're very nice. This isn't like anti-police, but there is in our society, it's just real.
Right.
Was it Chappelle keeping it real? I mean, this is what happens. I'm sorry.
So
that woke me up.
So outside of that, I guess if you anything from I guess from running the school standpoint, now because it seems like you're going more towards like that, like, what I have. These are kind of like the systemic things or that I have working against me.
Yes.
And that's been the theme since then. It's like understanding those systemic things. I heard something about a survey you did once of with the parents.
Yes.
And kind of asking them about what do they like about the school.
Yes.
Can you talk about kind of what you learned from
Yeah.
that?
So I don't know where this is. I wish we had saved it. I made the first ad for St. Martin de Porres. It's like Jesus on a cross and, work, study. It's like
right.
Black and white. It's like if you want to have kids not come to the school, this is what you should be putting out there. So we're having trouble with admissions. We figure, why aren't more people coming? So we look at other Cristo Rey schools, and we're doing the best job at that time of getting kids to come. So I'm like, what do we do? One of our board members says, well, ask the parents. Why did they send them here? I said, that's a good idea. So we sent out the survey. And we had open-ended questions. We didn't say, do you send your kid here because there's good academics? No. It's like, why do you send your kids here? List the top 3 reasons, okay? The top 2 reasons, the third one, I don't even know what it was way down, was the top one was safety. And I'm thinking to myself, safety? Like, I send my kids to grade school. I don't worry about safety.
Right.
That's not even an issue. It's an issue, safety. And then affordability, that I can afford it. Now, a lot of these kids were coming from Catholic grade schools where they were paying thousands of dollars, like probably half their income, not half their income, but maybe 25% of their income to send their kid to a safe school. Here, they're paying $300 to send their kid for a year. So we started pushing that. We said, safe and affordable. That's what this is here. Right. And by the way, a very good school. So that was surprising to us. Now, once the parents get here, see, what was happening is we were named St. Martin de Porres High School. What people saw was Saint had a $sign. Saint was spelled with a $sign. Any other Saint school in the city costs a fortune.
Sure.
So why wouldn't this one?
Right.
And the kid would come home, I want to go to St. Martin. Oh, honey, we can't do that.
Without even...
Yep, they don't... The kid doesn't explain, it's affordable because they want to go because of the work, and it's exciting, it's fun. So once the parent got here and not only saw that it was safe and affordable, but that it was a really good school, it took off. But that realization that something so simple that I take so much for granted in my own life is not something to be taken granted.
One of the things you talked about with Father Welsh and, more so Foley, is that their ability to kind of build a great team, and you kind of noticed they were good at that. What did you take from them, and what did you learn? How did you kind of adopt?
Well,
I think we have a good team here.
Yes, we have a great team here now, and when we started the school as well.
Right.
I had just read a book called Good to Great by Jim Collins. It's like a classic book now. When I was reading, it was kind of the new thing. But he talks about when you're starting entrepreneurially, when you're starting something, you want to get the right people on the bus. Don't worry about where they're going to sit. Just get the right people involved. And it will sort out, who does what.
Oh, wow.
So, which was great advice. So we looked for a principal because I knew that'd be very important. And we actually interviewed 26 people for the principal. And it was getting, like February, March. And we were going to open in August. And I remember saying this to the board, and I'm like so happy this didn't happen. Well, I could be the principal. I'd been a principal. 100 kids, what could be the problem? Again, my ignorance.
Right.
And then along came Mary Ann Vogel, who, worked at Collinwood, had been in, a pretty tough urban school, was an administrator, was a Catholic, grew up in this neighborhood, went to this grade school, so she knew all the transitions that had gone on and all the, possible taboos or whatever is going on out here. So we hired her, and that was great. But early on, we hired Tom Bennett. And Tom Bennett, for the work study, because we had to sell the jobs. We had to get the jobs. So Tom Bennett was an interesting guy. He was working at Benedictine part-time as an admissions guy. He also there was a family business where they sold like coffee mugs and, gewgaws for schools and offices and stuff. Pretty successful one. So he had this region, and then he had the Benedictine job. So he's sales and education. So we put an ad in Crane's Business for this position, and it says sales and education. His wife sees it and says, Tom, this might be something you really would like because it's got both things that you love. So he came like the last day. He applied on we had a deadline. So he comes the last day, and I meet him, and he's just a likable guy. I love Tom. And he was so into this. He just this is so great. I love this. And, once the kids started coming around, he was really good with kids.
Oh, yeah.
Really good with kids. Tom. Yeah, he's just so good. And he was good with CEOs. So, that's kind of
he had both. He could.
Yeah, there's 32 schools like this in the United States. There's only 32 people that do that job in the world.
Right.
There's no other job like that in the world. There's presidents, there's principals, but no corporate work study directors. So it takes a special person to do it. And in fact, in the network, that's probably the biggest problem that our leadership teams face is the really quick turnover of corporate work study directors. I think the average is under 2 years.
Wow.
Just keeps turning over. And Tom was here for 8 or 9 years. And Mary Ann was here for 8 or 9 years. I've been here. We had some different advancement people along the way. CFO stabilized with Martha. So we've had really strong leadership for the first 8 years. Nobody changed. And that's unheard of in a Cristo Rey Network school. So I think that's why we succeed. Then we transition, as any entrepreneurial startup, we'll start getting, we have policies and we do this. And, the people who really want to do startups, they go off and then we get another group. And we have now successfully transitioned into that second group that's being able to lead the school. So that's been our strong suit is leadership.
And it was just something about each of these people, it seems like along the way that you just...
Well, we had a retreat of the first 10 people, like the teachers and the administrators that worked here. And at the retreat, it was at River's Edge over in Cleveland on Rocky River Road. We asked each person, including myself, why did you come here? Okay. And all 10 had stories like mine, like Tom Bennett's, like Mary Ann Vogel. Like it was all like it's odd coincidence. Now, I'm not saying that God's up in heaven, pulling our strings. But here's what I'm saying. I got this from my wife, Maura. The call from God, and whatever that means for you, that call from outside that says you got to do something for others, that call is always there. There's always need, okay? It's when you're ready to hear the call, that's when it happens. So all these people, for various reasons in their life, were ready to hear that call and dive in. And so they dove in. I look at Carrie Stover, who then got married and became Carrie Grady. She was a teacher I hired at St. Ignatius because she was sharp and she was, Johns Hopkins, Teach for America. She had it all.
Right.
And I hired her. And she kind of didn't fit into St. Ignatius because she was into engaging kids, and she wasn't teacher in the front, comply, shut up, and I'll tell you what to learn. She was more discussion and talking and what do you think and getting your voice out. And
that just wasn't St. Ignatius style.
That wasn't her style at the time. But she was very good. And, at St. Ignatius, you got a job there. That's it's well paid, you're respected, and so forth. And I remember getting a call from her in September before we opened, so almost a year before we opened, saying, Mr. Clark, she called me Mr. Clark, I'm thinking about maybe teaching at your school, your new school. And I'm like, oh, Carrie, you've got a nice situation there. And, I can't even tell you we're going to last beyond a year.
Right.
That was the fear in the beginning when we started up of all these schools.
Like they
wouldn't last.
Right.
So, you'd give up tenure, you'd give up your track and everything by coming here. Well, I don't know. I said, okay, I'll tell you what, we're having a curriculum committee meeting tomorrow. I wasn't on the committee, but I said, I'll call the woman. Her name was Karen Nestor, and see if you could come.
Mm-hmm.
So I call up Karen Nestor, and I tell her, Carrie Grady, I have her back. Oh, yeah, send her along. So she comes. After that meeting, Karen Nestor called me up and said, hire that woman.
They had Karen was writing a curriculum, and she said,
hire that woman.
She just did something
right away.
Meeting and was like, hire.
It's clear she got it.
She understood it.
So, that's Adam Muster. I mean, same thing. These guys, young people, Devin, Lynch Huggins Zepp, they came, or Lynch Huggins at the time, who came along, Faith Deppert, Hurley. These early teachers, and I'm not purposely leaving people out.
Right. You're recalling. And
this is what I recall right now at this
John Monahan.
Yeah, Monahan, exactly. You know him. So those people were ready to hear it. They were ready. And I worked here, as did Tom and every other leadership team member, worked at this school 7 days a week for 4 years.
Yeah.
We would joke that we would say between Christmas and New Year's, we're not open. You can't come to work. And the first time we said that, Tom, Mary, and I ran into each other on Christmas afternoon.
Oh, my gosh. Well, I remember, early on that I would be here till 8 or 9 o'clock.
Oh, yeah.
Because I didn't want to go home. I was just having so much fun.
Well, then we found out you slept at times, too. We won't go into that.
No.
But yeah, it was just, it needed that kind of commitment. To go on. Now, that's not to say people now don't have that commitment, but we don't need to have that. We have process. We know how it works. We have a person to do that.
Which we'll get into later, though, about that stuff. But I guess one of the themes, I think, to kind of wrap things up here, you talk about a few times this ability to tell a story and be a good storyteller and
storytelling.
Yeah, just the idea of you're a really good storyteller, I think is going to be a theme as we continue to do these podcasts. People are going to see that shine through in what you do and what you're able to do. You talk about the guys before you that you learn from are really good storytellers. And there was a quote earlier that you mentioned about the ability to tell a story. Can you talk about that and then maybe talk about some things and some ways you've learned how to tell stories? Or
Sure.
Do you think it's something that...
Well, I think what I've learned, what makes a really good story is it's got to be authentic. It's got to be real.
Right.
You can't just manufacture it. We're not talking about making up a short story. Mm-hmm. The stories I'm talking about are true.
Right.
And they're also, when you're telling a story, when I'm telling a story, I don't realize how the passion comes through.
Right.
But that's what people always tell me. In response, well, my God, you're really on fire about this.
Right.
Oh, yes, I am. So you can't fake that.
Mm-hmm.
That has to be real that way. The other thing is there are techniques to telling stories, and you can read about them. Mm-hmm. And that's what a lot of English classes about how to do a story.
Right.
One of the things that I learned early on about telling a story about St. Martin and getting people involved is, first of all, tell a personal story. Tell a story about Gary Martin. Tell a story about somebody else. Tell Elena Sanchez and I Am From, the poem she wrote. That stuff, you can't make that up.
Right.
That is real, and it's heartwarming and personal. Mm-hmm. And that's very important. But Steve Jobs, when he would present the first PowerPoint, I think he used PowerPoint or whatever they call it on Apple Slides or whatever, about the iPhone. And I think it's on YouTube. You might be able to find it. But the presentation was this. It was, here's a iPod. Here's a telephone. Here's a notepad. Here's all this stuff. And here's headphones. And they're all disconnected. And it's just a struggle. I forgot this. I don't have that. And it's kind of a mess. And it's wires everywhere and so forth and so on. And then the next thing is a picture of an iPhone slowly rotating with gleaming sunshine coming over it. And then this solves all your problems, okay? And the model of that story is the story of, and it's the story of Beowulf. It's, there's evil, and it looks horrible, and then along comes good, and they have a battle, and good wins. And that's so good. The hero champions, kills the dragon. Okay, that's been a storyline. There's Boy Meets Girl. Kurt Vonnegut has a great YouTube about how stories work. And so that's a good one to listen to. But that's how we kind of presented the story about Cristo Rey when we first came here. We said, here's the situation of education in the city of Cleveland for kids that can't afford to go to a private school.
Right.
This is what they got. And we hammer the statistics. 33% graduation rate. 8% go to college. It was horrendous when we first started. I mean, you think you're in Haiti. I mean, it was really bad. So it's horrible. What are we going to do? And then, ba-boom.
Here, St.
Cristo Rey, St. Martin. This is how it works. Wow, what a great idea. The work-study thing alone is a hell of an idea.
Right.
I mean, and it draws people to it. And it draws actually some people that feel, well, they should have to work for their, okay, well, they are.
Right.
Okay? Now, they're not working because they should. It's an experience that's good, and they're going to learn from it. It's another way of learning. Actually, as we found out, remember when they first sent them out, that wasn't the plan.
Right.
But what you get out of that work experience stays with you for life. So, yeah, storytelling is an art. But I think that I don't care how artful you are, if it's not from your heart and you're not talking to another person's heart. When I tell stories and they're honest, true stories, it's hard not to fall into it because it's human. I think that's the basic thing. This is humanity. This is at the very basis level. You've got a city teeming with 14-year-olds that have very little chance.
Do you journal? I mean, because some of the things you talked about, I mean, you said October of this year. Like you were.
How do I remember that? Yeah. Well,
I know you're moved by it, but you were, I remember this and I remember that.
Well, I did write a lot about that experience in Peru when it happened. And I have that. It's about 20 pages of my experience because it was so mind-blowing to me to have that.
And you wrote that right then?
Right then and there. That night I started writing.
Wow.
So I'm not a journaler. I wish I were.
But I mean, even then, that's clear to how moved. That shows how moved you were.
Exactly.
If you're not a journaler,
and I write 20 pages.
You wrote 20 pages.
Exactly. I mean, that's just wild. So what I found though is I carry around a big black notebook. It's like a moleskin but on steroids. It's probably 8 by 10 or whatever. And if I'm at a meeting or I'm sitting on a plane, or I just write everything, just chronologically. It's not by subject. So, and I will sit down, either by myself or with my assistant, and just go back, 10 pages. Oh yeah, I said I'd get Gary that story. I better go send it to him, or, I meant to call that guy, and I got to call that guy. So it's a way of reminding myself because I am. Some people say I'm episodic. I mean, it just comes and goes.
And you schedule that time to sit down.
Yeah, to sit down and say, all right, let's make sure. Now, with my new Galaxy Note 8, with its stylus, I can pull it out and just write a quick note.
Right.
And I can actually send that note to somebody. So if I had an idea like we had this horrible Florida school shooting, and I'm reading the accounts, there were a lot of people that were in rooms, and the messages that they were getting were email, and I'm thinking, well, why wouldn't you text them?
Right.
They all have phones, and maybe they did or couldn't or did. I don't know. I'm not. That was so horrific. Who knows? Who knows what I would do? I would not be that coach who stood in front of those bullets.
Right.
That's unbelievable.
Unbelievable.
That is unbelievable. Okay, back to the story. So, when our crisis plan, we should send out updates.
Be able to text
to all the
everybody.
students, which we can do.
Right.
To say, hey, stay down, or he's out of the building, where the police are coming, everything's okay, calm down, or whatever. That we can say that. I mean, it's horrendous that we have to be thinking about this. Yeah, email's not the way to go.
No, that makes a lot of sense.
And we have the ability to do that with parents too, because you see these parents waiting and waiting and waiting, and it's so hard. So, so.
All right, so that's an example of just how you kind of capture stories. I think we'll start there and then follow up maybe next week and kind of talk about some more about the early years of St. Martin.
Yeah.
And everything. So thanks for coming, or thanks for talking with me. I appreciate it. And
loved it.
This concludes episode 2. Thanks, Rich.
All right. Thank you, Gary.
Thanks for listening. Hope you enjoyed the show. Please feel free to share the show on all your social media accounts and websites, or email friends or any family that you know that might be interested in the story. Please also go to YouTube, iTunes, and other places and subscribe to the show. That would be a big help and helps us get the word out as well. Some other ways you can support the show is by signing up for a Patreon account that supports the show directly. If you go to patreon.com/circulate, there's also a support under the support tab on our website. It'll direct you to the Patreon account. Also, there's a PayPal account that people can make one-time donations. And also on our website, there's a apparel that you can purchase under the shop tab. And in general, I just hope you keep coming back and keep listening. Thank you. See you soon.